Just a few quick reminders for myself and some lessons from the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Some of the verses we just recited were about the prophets, alayhimus salam. May Allah's peace be upon them all. Two of the prophets we heard about in Surah Yunus, in the verses that were just recited, were the Prophet Lut alayhi salam and the Prophet Shu'aib alayhi salam. In general, the stories of the prophets make up quite a bit of the Quran. There's three major categories. There's three ways we can relate to the stories of the prophets that really apply and make a difference in our lives. Some of these have to do with how the prophets were treated, including the very last and final prophet, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The three groups of approaches, or the three mindsets, even you can call them the three strategies that the prophets were sent to used, had to do with the first one being dismissal because of disruption. Excuse me. Again, when the prophets were sent to a people, they were dismissed because of what they disrupted. Dismissal because of disruption. This is why the prophets often came with a solution that was hard for the people to understand. It was either upending their culture, changing their practice, and completely altering the social fabric, excuse me, the social fabric of their lives. This included something as minimal as doing something their forefathers didn't do. It bothered them. It also included, in the story of Shu'aib alayhi salam, doing business in deceitful ways. When Shu'aib himself, who was a person who dealt as a merchant, he taught them, you have to do business in a way that maintains the principles of not cheating people. And that's why the verse says, Baqiyatullahi khayrul lakum. What you do when you follow the rules of Allah, that is your profit. Following the rules of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the profit. Because the people of Shu'aib, what they used to do is cheat people so they could get more profit. And what they were trying to do was make more money by cutting corners. And this is essentially the problem with a lot of things today. People want to take shortcuts. People want to have an upper advantage and take people's property, people's time, people's resources, and misuse them. But if you don't do things according to the moral code, you will always be a loser, no matter how much gains you have in this life. So in essence, this was again, just summarizing the three main groups. Dismissal because of disruption. The prophets also come with something that's not easy to swallow when you first hear about it. It's a different message. It's a different way of thinking, and it makes people uneasy. But that sometimes shows you have to really shake things up to make people realize what they are in needs to be changed. It just can't be maintained as status quo. The second major group of approaches to the prophets when they came to their people is persecution because of position. So the first one we said was dismissal because they get disrupted. The second one is persecution because of position. And this has to do with both the position of the people that the prophets were sent to. Sometimes they were sent to the people who were highest in society, because the word in the Quran used for the people that spoke against the prophet is al-mala. All al-mala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses that word repeatedly in the Quran. This word literally just also means to be full. What are they full of? Why are the people in charge called the people who are full? Quite simply put, it just means they're full of themselves. They're full of their pride. They're full of not being able to take in any more truth except what they think is true. So it's hard for them to hear somebody else telling them to do something else. So because they are in that position, they start persecuting people. And usually, The people that follow the prophets, especially in the initial stages, including the last prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, are the people who are considered the low people of society, people who are not well-to-do, who don't have a status, who don't have an influence. But that doesn't dictate how successful you are in your message of calling people to Allah. Who follows you is not as important as the type of people that are committed to you, because they have less in the dunya, sometimes they have more dedication in what they want to commit themselves to the akhirah. It's not always the case, but that's the general rule of thumb. So the first one was dismissal because of disruption. The second one was persecution because of position. And the third one, quite simply put, is mockery and all the steps that lead up to murder. I used just the way of remembering things are easier if you use the same letters a few times. So murder was probably the last step, but a frequent step taken, because the qatl of the anbiya is called out by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَقَتْلَهُمُ الْأَنْبِيَا بِغَيْرِ حَقٍّ. They literally resorted to go through stages where finally they would be willing to take the life of a person and completely end his being there. Why? Just because it bothered them. He disrupted them. They tried persecuting him. And the last thing was they tried mocking him. I mean, this meant as little as saying, you are just a human being like us. Why should we listen to you? This was their excuse. Another excuse Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala recalls in the Quran. You're not an angel. You're just a human being. Why should we listen to you? Then they said, sometimes it went in physical attacks, personal attacks, because Musa alayhi salam was attacked for having his speech impediment. So it even got focused on the personality of the person, forget who they were calling and what they were calling to. And this is why essentially the prophets were always overlooked by those who were selfish and self-centered and had their own motives, because they didn't look at who was calling them and what the message was, because they were righteous people. They were people that were accepted. And sometimes this led to a lot of difficulties in the prophets' lives, especially in the case of Ibrahim alayhi salam, whose nephew Lut we just heard about. Lut and Shu'aib were in the same general area. When the people came to Ibrahim alayhi salam and gave him the glad tidings, angels gave him glad tidings of the son of Ishaq and Yaqub, a progeny that would continue to be prophets. But the same angels went to the people of Lut and destroyed them. So this shows you, when you are doing your job, you can sometimes be given good news as a sign from Allah, sometimes bad news, because Lut alayhi salam was really distressed that his people were going to be destroyed. And we all know in the city of Sodom, the people of Lut used to approach the same gender to the other when it came to their sexual desires. This is why they were destroyed. This is why that whole act is now labeled sodomy. But the fact of the matter remains, it bothered Lut alayhi salam. He was from them. The same thing with Shu'aib. He was from them. He even says in the verse, وَيَا قَوْمِ لَا يَجْرِمَنَّكُمْ شِقَاقِي يُصِيبَكُمْ مِثْلُ مَا أَصَابَ قَوْمَ نُوحٍ. I'm afraid, my people, that you think I'm only speaking to you as someone among you, but I'm speaking to you as someone who's really concerned for you. It's not about who I am and the fact that I'm one of you, because they kept telling him, why are you going against us? You're one of us. He said, it's not about where I'm from, my family, my background. He said, I'm only fearful that you're going to get yourselves into being eligible for the punishment of God. And I think the best summary of all this in Surah Maryam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala beautifully describes the general attitude of people who reject the truth. This can be people sometimes who even listen to the truth, claim to follow the truth, but get caught up in the same things that people who are completely away from the truth think. So that means us as Muslims, we submit, but we get sometimes drawn and misled into the same line of thinking that people who are not Muslims sometimes think. And this is why the lessons are there in the Quran. It's not us versus them. All these qualities in the Quran that talk about disbelievers can be in believers to some extent, to some level. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِذَا تُتْلَى عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتُنَا بَيِّنَاتٍ. And when our signs are recited to them, قَالَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَيُّ الْفَرِيقَيْنِ خَيْرٌ مَقَامًا وَأَحْسَنُ نَدِيًّا. The people who believe Those people who disbelieve say to the people who believe, who is better in position? So again, it comes down to being influential. They thought this meant that you are right. How many things you had to call your own, how much political clout you had, how many people actually listened to you. This they thought was position and power. And again, I'm just reviewing those three things. We said dismissal of prophets because of disruption, persecution because of position. This is what the same thing is being referred to here. The last thing was mockery leading up to murder. So they said, Ayul fariqaini khairu maqama. Look at us. We're the high people in society, so you should listen to us. We're the high people in society, so we decide what goes best. And this is why you're having now trouble. Even lawmakers deciding when a whole country was held hostage and the capital was under siege, still being debated about whether that was a heinous act, a criminal act, because people in power refuse to see correct for correct and incorrect for incorrect sometimes. It's hard for them. The lines become blurry because they're in positions of power. The second quality that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala summarizes in this is the people who reject only think about themselves and who they are. And then the second quality is وَأَحْسَنُ نَدِيًّا, who has more showing, more splendor, more of a following. So they looked at who the followers were. So one thing was themselves. They were the problem. They had too much pride. And then they saw the people who were being the Prophet's followers and said, no, these are the lowest people. These people have no influence. These are the marginalized people. These are the people. That's why we have to listen to the voices of everyone, especially the marginalized people who are being put into categories, not heard from, the voiceless. They have sometimes the best things to say about the things that they have persecuted and they have been persecuted for and persevered through in standing up for the truth. So it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter who's bringing the correct thing in life. We should treat every piece of advice like this. We should understand that who is being brought to us and what's being brought to us is more important, because this is a means of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guiding not only people who are away from the truth, but even followers of the truth. How do we keep ourselves on the truth, remind ourselves of the truth, remember when we do slip up that we are brought back to the correct ways of thinking. And we have to do this in a beautiful way, whether we deal with people who are on the outside or the inside. We never want to turn people away from Islam. Zayd ibn Suna'a, in the Prophet's, I'll end with this story. He was a rabbi in Medina after the Prophet's hijrah. When the Prophet ﷺ came to Medina, Zayd, who was then a Jewish rabbi, was very well off. He had everything. He had faith. He had his status with his people. He was a learned person. He didn't need anything. But when the more he started to look at the Prophet, the more he started to think about the Prophet, he knew this could be a person that he might need to follow. Because the Jews were told that a Prophet is coming. They were just, again, too stuck up and too caught up in that. It was not one of them. It was not from them. So they didn't want to follow him. But so Zayd went to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Umar ibn al-Khattab is sitting right next to him. And Zayd says, Ya Muhammad, I had loaned you such and such amount of money. And even though it was a few days before the money was due, he says, pay me now. Otherwise, I will let your people know that you don't live up to the same qualities that they are known for, which is to be completely forthright and completely transparent in giving back the dues. So the Prophet ﷺ was a little shocked. Umar got mad because the man came up and grabbed the Prophet and shook him and physically almost assaulted him and started demanding his money. So Umar, as usual, would want to defend the Prophet, as we would all. Just seeing this happen in front of him, he couldn't stand and was besides himself. So when he got up to almost stop the guy and probably put him in his place in a very physical way, the Prophet ﷺ stopped him. And he asked the man what he wanted. And the man explained, I had loaned you. I'm coming back now for that loan. The Prophet ﷺ said, give him what he's asking for plus more. Give him on top of that. And then the man comes back to Umar, and the Prophet ﷺ, he says, I don't want anything from you. I could see prophethood in your face. All I want to do was test you. When you got pushed to the limit, the two things that told me you were a prophet, besides the obvious signs of how you look and who you are, he said, when I pushed you to anger, you chose tolerance. When I literally shook you and put you out of your element and took you out of your comfortable position, you chose tolerance. And the second thing that made me know you were a prophet, I don't need the money. He said, when you were pushed to insult, you showed even more grace. When you had been given no excuse but to show the same attitude I showed towards you, you showed even more magnanimity, or you showed that much more acceptance and the fact that this person needs something, let's give him what he needs. So again, when we are pushed in times where people are following truth or not, or sometimes when people are followers of truth but they don't listen to you, we have to show these qualities. When it comes to anger and frustration, choose tolerance. And when it comes to you being insulted and attacked and malaligned and your name is smeared over and over again, what you should first show, you have to still seek retribution and seek justice. There's no doubt about that. But the first and instinctive, reactionary, right-away quality should be showing grace, hilm, towards whoever is attacking you and whoever wants bad for you. May Allah make us from those people who follow all the prophets, alayhimus salam. May Allah make us from those people who are exemplary in their behavior. May Allah help us realize our shortcomings, and may He make us from the people who are steadfast, sincere, and successful. Ameen. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.